Um, all right, we'll start this Finance and Audit Committee meeting for the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District for Thursday, June 24, 2021. If you'd, Madam Clerk, if you'd call the roll, please.
Absolutely. Director Wood,
Aye.
Director Jones,
Here, and I.
Director Sailors.
Here.
Excellent. And Director Orzali is absent.
Outstanding. Thank you. Looks like we got everyone ready. Our first item on the agenda is a consent calendar. Do I have a motion on that?
I'll make a motion. Second.
All right. We got a motion and a second. If you would call the roll, please.
Director Wood,
Aye.
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Sailors.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you much. Our next item is a presentation item, and that goes to Mr. Campo. You have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wood and members of the board. I will attempt to share my screen here. The right presentation, it looks like it. There we go. So this should look familiar to you all. This is the Finance Committee report through April 30 of 2021. And the first slide we have is looking at the medic cost recovery. You can see these numbers are adjusted through mid-year. So basically adjusted for actual activity up through December and estimated through the balance of the fiscal year. And so you can see through April at about $34.4 million, we're on track with the adjusted budget. And we're continuing to report numbers below last fiscal year, certainly impacted by the COVID pandemic and the shutdown, but revenues are starting to pick up as we return back to normal levels of activity. You'll notice there's a flattening of that prior year green line that happens in June. And what happens in June of each year is we do an accrual at year end. We do an accrual, under accounting standards, we have to attempt to match the revenues earned in a period with the expenses incurred in a period. So once we get past June, there's about a 60 to 75 day lag or so in collecting for transports. So we wait until the middle of September or so to capture all of those transports, the revenue associated with the transports that happen in the month of June. So those come in, they trickle in, in July, August, September. So we accrue that revenue back to June 30. So we match that revenue with the expenses occurred in that last fiscal year. But if you recall, last year in June, it's kind of right in the middle of the stay-at-home orders, right? So that's when we saw that decrease in transport activity. So we only adjust that accrual number at June 30 because typically from year to year, unless you have a pandemic, the activity is pretty similar and the impact is very, very minor. But we did have quite a reduction in those transports in June of 2020. June of 2020. So that adjustment that occurred in June pretty much wiped out the June revenue. Now, of course, when we get to June 30 of this year, we should see an opposite effect. So we should see, I'm hoping to see a spike up in June of this year because that accrual that we look at, the revenues that come in July, August, September should be much higher than they were last year. So that number should turn around when you see this report next. Just wanted to kind of clarify that flattening of the line for last year.
Thank you.
Next is our look at overall revenues. And you can see the red line there is just slightly under budget. But I think by the time we get to the end of June, we'll be on target or exceeding that revenue number. For example, we did receive in June earlier this month about $700,000 of additional GEMT reimbursement that was not expected, was not anticipated. It relates way back to 2012, 13, 2014, 15 years. So it was a cleanup for those years past. So this is another $700,000 that was not anticipated and not built into the budget. I'm also hoping to see a nice property tax cleanup in June to boost those numbers even a little higher. Okay, this next chart is tracking salaries and benefits throughout the year as compared to budget and compared to last year. So you can see we're right on target with respect to salaries and benefits, and expect to stay that way through the balance of the year. Okay, in terms of total expenditures, we're tracking slightly under budget, which is typical for the district, especially in the services and supplies category. I wouldn't be surprised if we got to the end of the year and we had budget savings there of maybe $1 million to $1.5 million overall. So that's tracking right where we expect it to be this time of year. Next chart looks at the operating reserves, general fund reserves. You can see with that spike in April there with the property tax collection, we're back into positive territory. We're projecting that yellow dash line going across the top is where we expect to be at June 30 at about 34.1 million here, but I'm thinking it's going to be higher. It's going to be probably closer to 35 million. If not exceeding 35 million, which will put us right at about 15%. Okay, this next slide is just looking at overall cash for the district, and you can see we're at about $70 million, slightly below, let's see, the green line, so slightly ahead of where we were last year. So cash is right about where it should be this time of year. And that cash has got to carry us, through our dry period into, next property tax payment, which would be in December or so. This is a look at the OPEB trust fund. Call it the CERP fund. This is the fund established for retiree medical benefits. It's managed by CalPERS. The total as of April 30th was about 66.2 million. And what I'd point out there is that significant investment earnings. So the fund is having its intended consequences here, right? So the more money we can accumulate and set aside, the more we can earn in terms of earnings. So out of that 66.2 million, you have 22 million of investment earnings. So about a third of the funds in that trust fund now are represented by investment earnings as opposed to contributions from the district. And hopefully that continues on that trajectory going forward. There's been some fairly significant earnings even between April and today. So we're hoping to see that number jump up at June 30.
Just for context, Mr. Campo, if you would, what does that 66.2 million, what's the current value of the unfunded liabilities that offsets against?
Director Wood, I don't have that handy.
Sorry.
But I will certainly have that for you. I can't recall offhand what that unfunded liability is.
Yeah, my memory has a number, but I don't know if I'm accurate. So that's why I was curious. It's awesome to see us moving.
I think we're at about 220 million in unfunded liability, and then offset by the 66 million that is currently in the account now.
Thank you. That sounds about right. Yep.
That's about where my memory. So we're close to a quarter of the way there.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. And that's really good news. Those were the same numbers I had in my head.
Yeah.
Okay.
In 8 years, that's awesome. That's an awesome result.
Well, that goes with that's pursuant to the board's policy and the board's discipline to continue putting those funds aside every year. And like I said, the more the more we can build that fund, the more it's going to earn and the faster it's going to grow. So it'll start compounding on itself. So just to recap, mid-year budget, as I mentioned, reflects the actual activities through December. So your budget has been adjusted as of the mid-year. Revenues and expenditures are on track with that updated budget. Reserves are slightly below last year, but like I said, that's a projection at this point, and I hope we can make up that difference by the time we get to June 30. Cash balances are still remain slightly higher than last year. And our April 30 reserve balance is 43.5 million, as I pointed out. And we expect to end the year in the 34 to 35 million dollar range and be at the board's targeted 15% reserve level. And that concludes my report. And I've got a follow-up item to get you some more detail on that unfunded liability. So we'll get you some more accurate information or confirm your thinking on that. I do want to apologize. There's an item on the regular agenda this evening dealing with the refinancing of the lease revenue bonds. Typically, I would have liked to have presented that to the Finance Committee first, but given the timing and our wanting to get to market as soon as possible to lock in the lower interest rates, we thought it was best at this point just to proceed to the full board with that refinancing opportunity.
That is perfectly acceptable. I don't think anyone here will hold that against you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campo. Any questions from other members of the committee? Nope, hearing none. That should bring this meeting to a conclusion. Our next meeting will be July 22nd at either 5 or 5:30. And we will look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will go ahead and call to order the meeting for the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District for June 24th. And if we could have a roll call of directors, please.
Absolutely. Director Gould is absent. Director Orzali is absent. Director Wood,
Here.
Director Sheets,
Here.
Director Jones,
Here.
Director White,
Here.
Director Clerk,
Present.
Director Sailors,
Here.
and Director Kelly.
Present.
Excellent. We have a quorum.
All right then. At this time, if we could have a pledge to the flag. Director Sailors, if we could repeat after you.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
To
to
the
the
flag
flag of the
of the
United
United
States of
of
America
America
and
and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And please excuse me for not standing. ALS makes it a little more difficult these days. All right. Moving on to the Metro Cable announcement. The open session meeting is videotaped for Cablecast on Metro Cable 14. Replay on Monday, June 28th at 6 p.m. and Tuesday, June 29th at 7 p.m. on Channel 14, webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. Public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within the district's jurisdiction, including items on or not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers?
I did not receive anything ahead of time, but Art, can you please unmute all of the attendees and see if there are anyone who'd like to make public comment?
Yes, working on that now.
Thank you.
Attendees, you have the ability to unmute yourselves. If there's anything you'd like to present to the board, please do so now. Looks like no response.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you. And we will move on to consent items.
Mr. Chairman, I move the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Director Clark and a second from Director Wood on the consent agenda. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, moving on to action items. Item number 1, the election to the California Special Districts Association Board of Directors, Seat A. I don't know how many of you carefully read that part of the packet, but I do know that I noticed a couple of the directors, we've got, or a couple of the candidates, I should say, they're outside of the district. One of them is an incumbent, and then there is a gentleman that is within our district. And I was thinking that he may be somebody that we might consider. I'm not sure. Does anybody have any preferences on this action item?
Director Kelly, for those of us that can't do split screens, could you please name the candidates and where they're from? Or perhaps Michelle
candidates,
can?
I would ask, I don't want to fumble through my computer, so I will ask Ms. Dahoney if she would please do so.
Absolutely. So there are 3 candidates. The incumbent is Noelle Maddock, and she works for the El Dorado Hills Community Services District. It says she has served on the board of directors for CSD for 11 years. The second candidate is Scott Holbrook, and he is with Auburn Area Recreation and Park District. The third candidate is Patrick Larkin, and he is with the Cordova Recreation and Park District.
Thank you very much, Michelle. This is Director Jones. I was with Matt. I didn't want to have to fumble through my computer either. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
When ready for comments, Mr. Chair?
Director Jones, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have worked with Patrick Larkin, Cordova Parks and Rec District Executive Officer over the past several years. He has been very supportive of special district issues, including the one, there was a huge issue with rate increases by California American Water, and as a special district that hit him in particular because of all the water usage of Parks and Rec District. Anyway, he's a very popular member. Everyone looks upon him very favorably, and he has a very good reputation within the Cordova Parks community. So I could support a vote for Patrick Larkin.
Well, I'd be looking for a motion if you're inclined to do so.
Yes, sir. I move that Metro Fire District support Patrick Larkin of Cordova Rex and Park District, Parks and Rec.
Mr. Chair, I would echo Director Jones's comments, and I would second her motion.
Okay, then. We've got a motion to support Mr. Larkin for the seat A for the Board of Directors for CSDA. We've got a motion by Director Jones. We have a second by Director Wood. Madam Clerk, or I'll open it up to questions at that time. Is there anybody that wishes to speak? Seeing no efforts to speak. And again, I don't see everybody on the screen here. If you're interested in speaking, please jump in when you have a chance. But at this time, we have a motion, as I said, by Director Jones, a second by Director Wood. I see no questions. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Director Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, then. We have the refinancing of the 2011 lease revenue bonds. Mr. Campo, you are going to run point on this.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Thank you.
President Kelly and members of the board. I will attempt to do my share screen here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So, excuse me. So yes, President Kelly, I'm pleased to present this action item for the board this evening involving the refinancing of the 2011 lease revenue bonds. Actually, it was Director Jones that brought this up a couple of finance committee meetings ago. It may have been Amanda's last meeting or the one just after that. But it got me thinking, it sure is a shame that we couldn't refinance these bonds, take advantage of the low interest rates that we currently have available. Because these bonds were call protected. So there was an 11-year call protection. They were issued in 2011, so they wouldn't be available to call or to refinance until next year. I had the opportunity to have lunch with Rick Brandis and Nikki Tallman of Brandis Tallman. Now they're part of Oppenheimer, but I said, you know, it's like I said, I mentioned it's a shame we can't refinance these now when the interest rates are really low. You know, do you have any ideas? So they came back with a program that would allow us to to lock in the lower rates now today, and then refinance at the earliest opportunity next year. So that's the program I'm going to walk through and present to the board. Available on the call this evening is Rick Brandis with Oppenheimer. They would serve as the placement agent for the refinancing bonds, and Julie Wunderlich of Jones Hall. Jones Hall would serve as bond counsel on this transaction. They were actually part of the original 2011 transaction. I think they were maybe a disclosure counsel on that deal, but I'll let Julie correct me if I'm mistaken. So with that, I'll walk through the presentation, and then we'll be available. I might turn it over to Rick to talk a little bit about the marketing of the refinancing bonds and how that would work. And then we'll be available to answer any questions the board might have. So just to jump into this, again, the background, the district issued about $13 million in lease revenue bonds in December of 2011. Those proceeds were used to purchase equipment. I think it was several engines and maybe a truck at the time, but the bulk of the money went for the acquisition of this headquarters building and all of the improvements that were done at that time. Current outstanding principal of about $8.4 million. That's what we're talking about refinancing. The final maturity of this deal is May 15th of 2041. So we have another 20 years to go. And as I mentioned, callable at par on or after May 15 of 2022. So the challenge is how do we take advantage of the historic low interest rates today if the bonds aren't callable until next year? The solution that Rick and Nikki came up with was to obtain a forward rate lock from an institutional investor or a bank or a lender willing to lock in the rates today. This would be done as a private placement and structured as a tax exempt bond. And I'll let Rick talk a little bit more about that. The benefits of the program, we lock in the low rates today or in the near term here. There's no reserve fund requirement with this private placement, so it reduces the term by 1 year. So the final maturity would be May of 2040 instead of May of 2041. There's lower costs associated with a private placement because you don't have to do the official statement and some other requirements that would be associated with a traditional bond issue. And it would be done at, there would be a competitive bidding process, which would hopefully yield the lowest interest rate for the district. The preliminary outreach that they conducted reflected an interest rate of about 2.94%, as compared to some of the longer term bonds we're looking at now are at the 5% range. So it's a substantial reduction. Annual debt service reduction of about 115,000. So current debt service is about $675,000 a year on these bonds. That would drop to about 550,000. Estimated total savings of 2.2 million over the term, the remaining term of the bonds. If we discount that back to the present, so the present value of that 2.2 million is about 1.7 million. That represents about 21% of that 8.4 million outstanding. So in essence, you're saving 20% by doing this refinancing program. In order to accomplish it, there's some professional services that are needed. I mentioned bond counsel, Jones Hall. Just really quick summary, they would prepare all the legal documents and all the required board actions. They would assist with the structuring of the transaction to make sure it ensures or complies with all the tax laws. And then they would render an opinion on that compliance that the bond buyers can rely on, that those bonds will be exempt from income tax, the interest on those bonds. And then the really important is the placement agent, which would be Oppenheimer and Company. They would draft the lender request for proposal. They would distribute that to the institutional investors. They would evaluate all the proposals as they come back in and then make a recommendation on the best selection to the board. If the board was to proceed with this action this evening, they would distribute the lender RFP on June 29th with the proposals due back around July 13. We'd be back to the board at your July 22nd meeting to approve the financing documents. Pre-closing would be around August 10. That would lock in the interest rate. And then the final close would be in February of 2022, which would be the earliest date that we could call those 2011 lease revenue bonds. So the recommendation would be to adopt the resolution in your packet providing authorization to proceed with the financing and approve the professional services agreement for bond counsel and for the placement agent. If there's no questions on my brief presentation, I'd like to maybe invite, with your permission, President Kelly, invite Rick Brandis to talk a little bit about the marketing program for these lease revenue bonds.
Okay,
If that's
please,
okay.
Mr. Brandis, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I'm Rick Brandis with Oppenheimer and Company. And for a private placement, what we typically do is we create a competitive environment, a bid situation for you, the district, by distributing a lender request for proposal. It will include a credit package about the district, about the bond, about the security of the financing, and we will request what we call a forward rate lock. That would be an interest rate that would be locked until we can close the bonds shortly before the call date next year. We have a portfolio of 30 banks. Not all of them do provide a forward rate lock, but the ones that do, we will present the RFP to them. We typically give them 2 to 3 weeks to respond with the proposal. During that time, they will do a credit review of the district, and they will submit for credit approval and come back to us with a term sheet. That term sheet would include your rate. In terms of the loan, they will provide prepayment provisions and any other security aspects, typically not much different than what you have now. The difference between a private placement and your bond issue currently is the 2011 bonds required a reserve fund. Typically on a private placement, the banks do not need a reserve fund. So one aspect that Ken mentioned to you is without the reserve fund requirement, we are looking to shorten your 2011 loan from 2041 to 2040. So you're saving money by foregoing one more year of interest payments, in addition to the lower interest rate. And we hope to get a few proposals. Typically we do when it's a large issuer or a large agency like the district that encompasses a wide area with a big balance sheet. We typically get a lot of people, a lot of banks who are interested. And some of the banks that we go to include Chase, City National Bank of Beverly Hills, regional banks like Umpqua Bank. We go to Western Alliance Bank, Branch Banking and Trust out of North Carolina. Quite a few banks are interested in this type of loan. When the proposals come back, then we'll work with Mr. Campo and Jones Hall and create a spreadsheet summarizing all the proposals and having a call to discuss the pros and cons of each proposal and selecting the proposal that will provide the district with the lowest rate and most favorable terms in general.
All right, thank you very much. Are you prepared to take questions, Mr. Brandis?
I certainly am, and on the call with us is Julie Wunderlich of Jones Hall. If it's a tax question, I'm going to throw it over to her.
Okay. All right. Are there questions of Mr. Brandis? No questions. Any questions of Mr. Campo?
Mr. Chair, I had a quick question. This is Gay for any of the three there. I missed it. When in July we vote to go ahead, when will we have the bids by then? Forgive me, I know you said this, but it escaped me.
And you want me? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, correct. If you determine to go forward tonight, our goal is to distribute the RFP for bids next week and have bids come back before your board meeting, which I believe is July 22nd. I think we have bids coming back on July 13th. We'll summarize them. We'll go over them with Mr. Campo and prepare to have recommendations by the agenda deadline for the July 22nd meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if I may, President Kelly.
Yes.
This is an aggressive timeline. It's my familiarity with both parties. Rick Brandis, with Brandis Tallman now, Oppenheimer, and Jones Hall, that we're able to put this team together and get this out on the street, in a relatively short period of time. Again, our haste to get this done was to take advantage of the current low interest rates, just like you would to refinance your home mortgage. If you've been watching the credit markets here lately, I mean, there's a lot of kind of bouncing up and down and some fluctuation going on, uncertainty regarding unemployment, uncertainty regarding inflation rates. So I think the sooner we can get this out and get this locked in, the better. Like I said, I would hate to see the district miss this opportunity.
Okay. I did have one question myself. On on the projected savings of about 1.7, was that exclusive of that last year that we won't be paying? Or was that inclusive of that last year that we won't be paying?
Good question. It did include that final year that you will not be paying that final year.
That's part of the 1.7 million. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. And then the 1.7 million would that hopefully 1.7 million, that would not include either your fees for the sale of the bonds or for our bond counsel. How do those fees work?
The 1.7 million is net to you of the fee. Yeah.
All right.
We included all the fees in that calculation.
All right. Thank you for that help. All right then. Is there, what's your pleasure with the motion on the lease revenue bonds? The refinancing of the lease revenue bonds. Anybody?
Mr. Chair, this is Gay. I move that we go ahead with the restructuring of our lease revenue bonds.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Director Jones and a second by Director Woods. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right then. Item 3.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time, Mr. Brandis and Ms.
Wunderlich.
Wunderlich. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Item number 3 is notice of withdrawal by Metro Fire from the California Fire and Rescue Training Authority, JPA. Acting Fire Chief Greg Casatini. Mr. Casatini.
Good evening, President Kelly, board members, Chief Harms, and General Counsel Lavra. Greg Casatini, Deputy Chief, filling in for Chief Harms this evening. So this evening, staff proposes that the Sacramento Metro Fire District issue a written notice of withdrawal from the CFRTA Joint Powers Authority effective at the end of the 21-22 fiscal year. Now a little history. The CFRTA is a joint powers authority created on December 1st, 1997 between American River Fire, Sacramento County Fire, Cal OES, and the city of Sacramento for the purpose of acquiring, constructing, operating, and maintaining facilities for the purpose of providing fire rescue, EMS, and hazmat training. So on March 26th, 2021, Cal OES served a written notice of withdrawal from the JPA. Under the terms of the JPA agreement, any notice of withdrawal must be served in writing with 1-year notice at the end of the fiscal year. The end of the fiscal year is June 30th, 2021. With the unfortunate withdrawal of Cal OES effective June 30, 2022, Metro Fire needs to decide whether to continue to fund and operate the JPA with the city of Sacramento as a 2-member organization, or whether to issue a notice of withdrawal, which will trigger the dissolution of the JPA. Staff recommends that the board authorize the fire chief to issue a notice of withdrawal prior to the end of the current fiscal year to be effective June 30, 2022. The JPA has currently agreed to retain independent counsel to evaluate the assets to determine distribution. Metro Fire anticipates upon withdrawal that the attorney will conduct an audit of the assets and liabilities of the JPA pursuant to the dissolution provisions of the JPA agreement and California law. Staff recommends that the board authorize the fire chief to issue a notice of withdrawal of the Sacramento Metro Fire District from the California Rescue Training JPA. That's what we're asking for. And Council Lavra is here as well. So if you have any questions, please let us know.
Chief Casatini, this is Gay Jones. Now, to clarify, the JPA assets are one thing, but Metro Fire remains the property owner, correct or not?
Yeah, that is my assumption, but I'm going to turn it over to Council Lavra for further information.
Yeah, I mean, this is John Lavra, Director Jones. The assets, here there's property assets and real property and fixtures and other personal property and equipment that are associated with the JPA. Those include a lease of the office building on Gold Canal, but also includes a long-term lease out at Zinfandel. And there's property associated with the Zinfandel property. So to your point, yes, there's assets and those have to be determined and distributed. And what I would add to Chief Casatini's comments is that if there's a withdrawal by Cal OES, which they've done here by way of their notice, under the withdrawal provisions of the JPA, then they're entitled to a return of the assets they have contributed with certain limitations on whether the asset has been commingled with other parties' assets or whether it's monetary assets which have been consumed for operation of the facility. If there's a dissolution, then there's an analysis and audit of not only the assets, but the liabilities. And that's why I think this is an important decision for the board. And that is because of the long-term liability of the JPA with respect to that real property in the lease out at Zinfandel. By going through a dissolution, it would allow an audit and apportionment of the assets and the liabilities present and future that exist with the JPA.
Do we have any dollar figures associated with these different categories?
I am not privy to that. I think that's one of the purposes for the independent counsel to go through and make an audit of what the assets and what the liabilities are and what their value is.
Forgive my ignorance here, John, but I'm not sure what liabilities would be associated with the Zinfandel site. However, is there, how can I say this? If something comes up in these assessments that might trigger a continuance, might give second thoughts to a continuance of the JPA, is that, under what circumstances is that possible?
Any party could attempt to rescind their notice of withdrawal. I've not seen that done, I will say, but the parties to the JPA always have the right to determine whether or not they want to make an amendment to the JPA agreement, for instance, to allow different changes and to allow the JPA to continue in some form. So that's an option out there as the audit progresses and things are looked at by all three sides. I don't know a lot about the thinking of Cal OES on this. I would tend to think just by reading their letter of withdrawal that they probably wouldn't be in a position where they would want to change their course of action. So any way you look at it, you're probably looking at a situation with Metro Fire in the city of Sacramento. But more importantly, by filing the notice of withdrawal now, which would trigger the dissolution, that gives Metro Fire the next year while this audit is going on to look at the situation and decide, hey, maybe and I know Chief Harms, in discussing the matter with him, is committed to the need for regional training and is open to, and I think would pursue looking at different models to provide that regional training, and perhaps looking at another model or another organization involving some of the other players in the region, some of the smaller city fire districts or city fire districts or special districts in moving forward. This gives us that flexibility to do that and to look at those options over the next year. Whereas if we don't, then we're looking at moving into the following year, having to make those decisions.
Well, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure we didn't put a brick down on the pedal and drive away. There are breaks involved if indeed situations change. So thank you for clarifying that.
Director Kelly, you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of the item? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, Gay Jones, I move staff's recommendation to authorize the fire chief to sign the letter of withdrawal from the JPA with a year's notice.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion by Director Jones, a second by Director Clark. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right then, we are on to presentation items. Mr. Fry, you have a fire station restroom facilities review prepared for us?
I do, yes, sir. And I will say good evening, directors. I am here at Director Saylor's request to go over the issue, and let me attempt to share my screen here. And what I want to start is, like I said, this is at Director Saylor's request. Specifically, the request was to address the issue, go through a timeline of the incident, and then specifically include next steps. So my presentation is geared to that. And I will apologize for the wordiness here, but I think the details are important for everybody to know what we've done and what's going on. So rather than relying on my words alone, I thought it was important to have it here written down for the directors. So at least my involvement in this issue started really in 2017, where I was newly employed here with the district. There was a lot of conversations about the need to update station facilities and the big lift that was going to be required. And in my conversations with Chief Harms and others, really the first step that we thought was to start to create the plan, but to define the issue. And in earnest, that started in 2018 with the facility condition assessment, when we hired EMG to come and basically take an inventory of all of our stations and the cost to maintain them, but also to update them to a number of functional issues, one of which was the restroom and bathroom issue. So I just want to mention here that in that FCA, the facility condition assessment, we asked EMG to compare the existing station facilities to our current standard. And I just want to mention the standard for the record. We do have an ADA restroom with unisex signage, all gender signage near the lobby that's intended for public use. We do, the current standard is to have one unisex bathroom for every 2 dorm rooms, and at least one of those bathrooms needs to be ADA compliant. And then finally, there is a full bathroom that's associated with the captain's quarters. So as you can see here, the price tag, the estimate in 2018 for these issues and others was the 51.3 million. Keep in mind that those costs have almost doubled since 2018. As I started to work on this issue and to figure out how we're going to address it, I wanted to break the non-compliant stations, 24 of them, really into 3 categories. One was stations that were really intended for demolition or relocation. The second is the location is good, the facility is good, they just need to be renovated and expanded. And then the third is where we have adequate square footage, we just needed to retrofit them and remodel them to meet the current standard. As I mentioned, this is really probably a 20 or 30-year plan, and it includes information from a number of studies, including the master plan, growth plan, impact fee program, standard of cover. And, we've even, Chief Harms has met with consultants on a number, twice that I'm aware of, to talk about things like a special tax measure to figure out how we start to tackle this issue. Shortly after the facility condition assessment was complete, we saw the amount of money required. The deputy chiefs and the chief met and basically thought the plan was going to take too long, and this was an issue that needed to be addressed immediately. So in essence, we started down basically a three-prong approach to tackle this issue. I continue to work on the long-range planning. Chief Casatini began to work on the personnel side of this issue. And then Deputy Chief Shannon was working on the facility side of this. So three-prong approach. And then I have a timeline of things that happened after the facility condition assessment, starting with the December 18 memo from Deputy Chief Casatini addressing some of the personnel issues within the stations. And then Deputy Chief Shannon in 2019 went to council and asked for a legal opinion and what was necessary for compliance. First in February related to restrooms, and then a follow-up with specifically shower and bathrooms there in March. And I have those, the council memos summarized there for you. It basically comes down to, in our stations where we have 4 members or less, separate facilities are not required, but they need to, the restrooms and bathrooms need to be lockable, and there needs to be appropriate signage. Where we have dual company stations, separate facilities are required. So moving on to 2019, once that information was in hand, Deputy Chief Shannon started working with our facility staff to take inventory of all our stations related to those conditions: number of members, gender-specific accommodations, gender neutral accommodations, signage and locks. As you can imagine, with 40 stations being built in over the last 6 decades or so, we have every combination under the sun. But once that was identified, work in summer 2019, facilities began working on stations that required signage and locking doors only, which left a handful of stations to be addressed. And then there in October 2019, Deputy Chief Shannon issued a memo specifically addressing the daily procedure for captains as they take roster and figure out who's going to be assigned to the station for that shift. There's a number of things that the captains are responsible for doing to make sure the compliance is addressed. So by the end of 2019, the compliance issue that was solved with just signage and locks was essentially done. And Deputy Chief Shannon turned his attention to the remaining stations that are going to need to be remodeled to be compliant. So that started in February 20 with Station 24 remodel. We retained a vendor to do that work, and COVID happens. So we, as you're all aware, shut down access to the stations so we could figure out how this was going to work and what protocols were going to be put in place. I understand that the vendor did return in June to complete the work, and Station 24 work has been done. And then at that point in time, essentially these type of capital projects were put on hold. We have continued the larger planning process, which you would expect. Deputy Chief Wagaman assumes Chief Shannon's position there at the end of the year. It begins planning with facilities to complete the restroom compliance remodels there for those stations. You can see the order there, 41, 53, 21, 23, and we're investigating 101. So a big part for this was the May of this year, we hired a plumber. So our facilities tech now has a plumber, which will allow us to do a lot of the work on these stations here in-house. A very good cost saver and time saver. So as I understand it, a few weeks ago, they started in on station 41. The first process is to start tracing the sewer lines. A lot of these stations are older. We have no plans. So they're really going to need to get into the site and start assessing the situation and then come up with a plan for the remodels. Chief Wagaman did want me to let you know that these remodels are going to go in order that you see listed here in the presentation. So next steps, where are we at and what do we do? As I mentioned, facilities have started working on the issue. They do intend to start working on the station remodels now, essentially, and we'll continue to do so until it's done. I do believe there is funding in next year's budget for this, this project. Moving back to the bigger picture, which is the big issue of not being compliant. I don't why we need to be compliant. Really, our goal is to be more than that, to be able to have the facilities that our members need to provide the service they provide. That is going to be a long-term plan where we need to identify funding sources. And we think the capital improvement plan is the right way to address this issue with the board. We think it's going to provide transparency. Rather than being included in the annual budget process, you will see specific project information where the project is listed, a timeline is given, sources of funding is given, along with the procurement process and everything we need. Those projects will be submitted with all of our capital projects. And then with the fire chief and the board, you will be able to prioritize these projects and determine how we move forward in getting this done. So with that, I will stop and ask for any questions or comments.
Are there questions of Mr. Fry from any board members? No questions.
Mr. Chair, I just would like to
Yeah.
thank Mr. Fry for his thoroughness and detail that he's presented us. It was very, very good, very detailed, very easy to understand, and I like the closing with the plan. So thank you, Mr. Fry.
And if I may add one thing here, and I'll really address this to the board. You're aware that we have for the last year been really fighting for COVID funding and relief funding. And we do have now access to the $100 million that's available to special districts. The one thing I think is important for the board to know is part of this strategy and getting this done is finding funds. And you know, as service is our #1 issue, and delivering that service is the most important thing to this agency. When we go through downturns, economic downturns, pandemics, these capital projects do get put aside, correctly so, but it has built up over decades. So one of the points I've been making at the state as we talk to our electeds, our state and federal electeds, the COVID is a good example of that, where we put our capital projects on hold to ensure we provided service. On paper, financially, we look whole. But what's missing is the millions of dollars that we move from training and capital projects to supplement those revenues. So I think this is an issue we're going to be talking about for a while. And as we do engage our electeds, we need to start telling this story. And I think the CIP allows us to do that, and then be able to specifically show the dollars that we are going to need to solve this issue. So thank you for that. I think it's an important point.
Mr. Chair, this is Gay.
Please.
Mr. Fry, thank you so much. Excellent report. And then your last few points just now are super critical because fire departments and fire districts across the country, when something becomes very difficult, challenging, disaster hits, we just tighten our belt and put our nose to the grindstone and just keep going. We have to be more vocal and more participatory in these funding issues at the state and federal level. That is critical. And thank you so much for bringing forward that point.
Thank you.
And if I could add, Mr. Fry, I'm happy to see that you guys have got people in the facilities department that cover the different trades that you need to be able to effectively do or at least control the scope of work that you're trying to make happen.
Yes.
So any other questions by directors? Seeing none, this is a presentation item. Again, as the other directors have echoed, thank you for putting together a report that addresses the issue that was in question and helps lay out a way to resolve things. Any other comments? No? All right then. Moving on to reports. President's report, I have nothing to report. Fire Chief's report, Mr. Casatini.
Thank you, President Kelly, Board of Directors, and Chief Harms. Greg Casatini, Deputy Chief, filling in for Chief Harms. So tonight, June 24th, as far as recruitment, we have an open office technician position that we have posted. The final filing date is July 7th. We have also announced our recruitment for lateral firefighter paramedics and firefighter EMTs. The final filing date is July 16th. Something to note about that is for both EMT and paramedic, that candidates must be currently employed with another fire agency as a full-time paid firefighter with at least 3 years of consecutive experience. So that is on our website. It's hosted through our delivery system to get the word out that we're looking for lateral EMTs and paramedics. We have a reassignment. So Captain Matt Smotherman selected to fill the EMS shift captain, EMS 24 on B shift, effective June 26th. We have a reclassification of Assistant Chief Adam House stepping down to Battalion Chief. He is assigned to Battalion 14 on B shift, effective June 22nd. And with that, we have an appointment. A promotion for was Battalion Chief John Rudnicki is now an Assistant Chief assigned to the Training, Safety, and Health Fitness Divisions, effective June 22nd. So congratulations to John. Effective June 22nd, we have 4 Battalion Chief promotions. Matt Cole, Brian Barthel, Christopher Vestal, and Brian Gonzalez have all been promoted to Battalion Chief effective June 22nd. And last Monday, June 21st, the City of Rancho Cordova City Council had a special recognition of key COVID-19 partners, and they recognized SAC Metro employees, Michael Skaggs, Danielle Blaschke, Sean Post, Christine Rivera, and Captain Scott Perryman for their leadership and hard work during the COVID-19 pandemic. That is all for tonight, unless you have questions. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions of Chief Casatini? No, then I guess Director Mitchell or Chief Mitchell would be next.
Good evening, President Kelly. Thank you. Hello, Board, Chief Harms, Chief Casatini. Adam Mitchell, Deputy Chief of Operations for Operations Report. I'll first start off, as Chief Casatini mentioned, I wanted to say thank you to former Assistant Chief Adam House for his leadership in the Training, Health, and Safety Division since 2018. He's been integral in leading that division through a number of programs and projects over the years that benefited the members district-wide, to include district-wide tactics and strategy training for all line personnel, live fire training, our SCBA replacement program, our hood and glove replacements, our fire department connection, newsletter that we put out. And also his leadership amongst the emergency operations team that was activated to help us manage the COVID pandemic and vaccinations, and many others. I just wanted to again say thank you to Chief House. He did a phenomenal job for us. And I'm looking forward to working closely with newly appointed Assistant Chief John Rudnicki in his new position. The second item tonight, we had an incident, a structure fire incident last Sunday up in Battalion 5 on the 20th that resulted in a burn injury to one of our members. Good news with that is he was taken appropriately to our burn center there at UC Davis. He was treated and released that day to be sent home to rest and recover, and I'm happy to report that he's doing very well. I just texted with him earlier before the meeting, so that's great news. But specifically wanted to express my thanks and our thanks to our members who were on duty that day in cooperation with the Firefighters Burn Institute to make sure that our member received the highest level of care possible that we so greatly are fortunate to have at the UC Davis Burn Institute. They did a fantastic job. So with those two items, I typically, the third one I would do here is a statistics report. But tonight I thought I'd do a little sneak peek behind the curtain about some of the data and information that we use for you as a demonstration for one of our software products that we have. We use multiple sources for our data to develop our situation awareness and our decision-making to include Image Trend, Deccan, and Terra. And it really helps us to look at from a data-driven empirical level on what we need to do moving forward and what our current trends are within the fire stations or fire district. There's an incredible amount of information available, and I'm gonna show you the interface here. And I would like to say thank you to Jeff Fry, Fire Marshal Barsdale, Assistant Chief Law, and our IT Director, Matt Roseberry, for their continued diligence in making sure that we're refining the data source and how that all works. I'll give you just a couple minute overview here about this specific program tonight that shows you how one of the ways that we can develop the statistic that you hear at each board meeting. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Thank you to Ken and Art for getting me set up here tonight for that. Let's see here. Okay, everybody see that? Thumbs up. I see Chief Casatini shaking his head. That's great. So here's a look at one of the dashboards, and you can see the incredible amount of information that's there. Right now, we're looking at the last 7 days of analytics pulled down from those different data sources. You can see the fire incidents, EMS, hazmat, all those different incident types and how many incidents we've run during that period, as well as what the overall percentage of incidents, where they're located within those different categories. You can also see that the hours of the day and when we're busiest. So over the afternoon hours there, as well as the days of the week down here. And then finally at the bottom of this page is our different incidents broken down by type. So usually I would tell you about how many structure fires we've had since the last board meeting. You can look down here. We've had 13 structure fires for 16%. Vegetation fires, we've had 33. And then our EMS motor vehicle accidents, 47 of those. And then over here, our non-motor vehicle accident EMS incidents. So a lot of data, and I'm telling you, this is like a information black hole. You can spend hours upon hours of going through and clicking on some of these things to look. So if I were just go here month to date since the 1st of June, I'm gonna move my screen here, hit apply. You'll see the numbers get updated. Oh, now it's not gonna do it for me. Try it again. Here, month to date. I'm glad Jeff Fry's still on here in case there's questions, because he is a wizard at all this. So you can see again, month to date, it shows a similar format for just those different, there's all kinds of different selections you can make here as well. So we'll look specifically at the fire incidents. We've had 294 since the 1st of June. Here's the breakdown of percentage. I'm gonna go up here to this map. So if you look, this is a incident performance, lots of color on there, lots of dots. So there's a lot of detailed information. I selected a layer that broke it down by division. But what I wanted to show is if we go back to just selecting one type of incident, select them all. Oops. Mouse has got a little latency there. There we go, okay. So if I just wanted to look at fires over the last month, from the 1st through the 24th, there they all are. So that's all the fire incidents that we've had within our district that our members have responded to. And you can see they're spread out. And you can go down, drill down even further by clicking on the actual fire incident itself, and it pulls up incident data specific to what that fire incident was. So a lot of data available. One other thing that I'll show before clicking off here, I can get to it. There it is. I can show a density map for our fires, and you can see throughout the district. So I can make it a little bit darker, and you can see throughout the district where our fire incidents have been located through the month of June. There's Highway 50, Highway 80, 99, Florin 53's area. So a lot of data available out there. This is a great program. Again, thank you to everybody that's been working on it. I thought that would be an interesting little tidbit there rather than just reading you some numbers, but I'm happy to take any questions as that ends the operations report.
Are there any questions of Chief Mitchell and the operations report?
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Saylor?
Yes, thank you. President Kelly. Chief Mitchell, can we get that on our iPad?
I would defer to Matt Roseberry, but I am positive that there would be a way to do that, and Jeff Fry could help there. Director says there is so much information in there. It is amazing. So yeah, we will definitely work on doing that if that's something you'd like to see. I don't want to speak. I don't know how that works for licensure and things like that, but it's a phenomenal aspect for data.
Thank you.
Any other directors have questions or comment? Director White.
Okay, so I saw that you were able to refresh it with new time periods. And I believe Intera allows you to do real-time stat monitoring. Have we configured a dashboard to include just response times and APOT, the arrival to patient offloading time? And, you know, because that's kind of measuring what matters or things that would be interesting from my perspective.
Absolutely, Director White. I appreciate that question. So the answer is we are currently working on continuing to refine our data. We do have another dashboard that's in there that shows current status of what's going on in the district as far as the ambulance patient offload times and things like that. There is actually a meeting next Monday with the vendor and some of our personnel and staff to continue to refine that data. I will say that this has been a recent linking up image trend, which you all know we just switched to at the beginning of the year or the end of last year, beginning of this year, to Intera has just happened over the last couple of weeks. And so we're still in the infancy stages. And so identifying those data points is a constant ongoing process right now, but that is one we are all very aware of and wanting to look at.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Gay Jones, and I would just like to reiterate that it would be nice to be able to, when needed, to access this information, iPad or Ouija board or whatever works. It's when we want that information, that is a great source. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Anyone else comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Director Wood.
Thank you, Chief Mitchell. The only thing I noted, it was actually wonderful. Like everyone said, it'd be great to be able to access the data. But the one thing I noted is when you broke out by divisions, that's the pre-redistricting division layout. So it'd be nice to have that data by current district.
I would like to say you get a gold star because that was hidden in there, but I can't say that, Director Wood. I will say, yeah, and like I said, the GIS and the data layers and how they're integrated in there is in that it's within the last couple of weeks, but we will make sure that that gets updated.
All right, then, is there anything else? Okay, seeing nothing else. Thank you for your report, Chief Mitchell. General Counsel's report. Mr. Lavra.
Sorry about that. No report.
All right. Moving on to Firefighters Local 522. I understand Mr. Scollard and Mr. Votava may be with us. Either of the gentlemen from 522 wish to provide a report? Seeing none, I'm sure they're doing well. Moving on to committee and delegate reports. Nothing from the executive committee, and Chief Mitchell, I understand you're going to cover Communications Center JPA and the California Fire and Rescue Training JPA.
Yep, as an alternate on both of those, I got nominated to do those tonight, and they're going to be quick. I will say that the Communication Center JPA has not met since the last board meeting, and the next meeting scheduled on July 13th, 2021. And if it's your pleasure, I can do also the California Fire and Rescue Training JPA, President Kelly.
Will you please?
Similar report, there has not been a meeting since the last board meeting, and our next meeting is scheduled for July 6th at 4 p.m. in Gold Canal.
All right, thank you for those reports. Moving on to the Finance and Audit Committee. I would call on Director Orzali, but he is not here. Is there another director that serves on that committee that may like to clue us in on what took place this evening? Director Wood, would that be you?
You're muted, Director Wood.
Yes.
My apologies. I'd be glad to report out on the Finance and Audit Committee, Mr. Chair. We had a thorough report from Ken Campo addressing the finances as of April 30th, 2021. Most metrics are on target to, we're on path to hit our targets in most areas, including our reserve at 15%. And one bit of good news also, our CERT fund is up to $66.2 million, and with a $220 million unfunded liability out there, we are approximately 1/4 of the way to meeting that unfunded liability. So it was excellent. Of that 66 million, 1/3 of that roughly is in investment earnings. So it just goes to show that the more money we're putting into this thing, it is earning additional monies on a compounded basis. So it was a very good report, very thorough, and appreciate King Campo's report. So that's all for the Finance and Audit Committee. Our next meeting is July 22.
All right. And we have the Policy Committee. Director Gould is absent, but I knew they have not met since he last reported out, and he will probably provide a report when he has the opportunity. All right, then, moving on to, we have closed session. Do you want to go ahead and dispense with the board members' questions and comments before we head to closed session? Is that an idea that's worth? All right, I see one or two shaking heads. Then let's start. Director White, would you please kick us off?
Sure, and thank you, President Kelly. One of the items on the consent tonight was a hazmat contract for services with Amador County. And I just wanted to give kudos to Battalion Chief Joe Farica, Special Operations. The feedback I got from Amador County was that he was extremely helpful and a pleasure to work with and deal with. So I'm glad to see that agreement get executed and approved tonight. So thanks to Chief Farica, and I appreciate the district's willingness to serve another county.
All right, Director Wood.
I don't have much to say, but I do want to at least just acknowledge and express that, say I'm very glad that our firefighter that was burned was able to be released that same day and is home recuperating, and I wish him all the best. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Jones.
Thank you, President Kelly. Echoing previous remarks and overall general comment, tonight we heard very significant detailed reports from so many areas of our operation. And I am very, very impressed and appreciative of all that information sharing that we've had, from finance to capital improvements to operations. And then with a little dig, I think we should encourage Ken to go out to lunch a little more often get us some more deals.
All right,
You
thank
got
you,
it.
Director. Thank you, Director Jones. Director Sheets.
Good evening. I just wanted to also send speedy recoveries and just so thankful that our firefighter was able to be released from the hospital and is doing well. Also, best wishes to Chief Harms in a speedy recovery. Missing you. And just wanted to congratulate all of the assistant chiefs on their promotions. And that's all I have. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. All right, Director Clark.
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing to add. I think the directors before me have expressed a lot of some of the comments that I had in mind. So everyone have a good weekend.
All right, Director Sailors.
Thank you, President Kelly. I would like to say thank you very much to Jeff for his excellent report on our remodel for the old stations that are in our district. That was an excellent and very well thought out report, and I love the timeline that was there. It's very unfortunate that COVID came along to make everything come to a halt, and it put the whole world to a stop. And unfortunately, when things like that happen, it just stresses everyone out, and no one can think straight, and everyone forgets what life was like before. But now we're back on track, things are coming along, and let's get the ball rolling again. Thank you very much, Jeff. My thoughts and prayers with the injured firefighter. I'm so happy that he's back to, did not have to stay in the hospital. And that's it for tonight. Stay safe, everyone.
All right. In addition to everything that was said, I wanted to extend my appreciation to Mr. Campo for pulling it together, the players, the pieces that needed to be to act on a question that a director posed and then save this district or potential savings for this district well in excess of $1 million. So appreciate that very much. And then for the firefighter that was burned, I hope that his recovery is speedy, and I'm glad that he was released the same day that he was injured. Moving on to our closed session. See you all on the other side here. We are back. Mr. Lavra, would you like to report out?
Yes, thank you, Director Kelly. The board met in closed session with respect to the first item on the closed session agenda regarding anticipated legal action. No reportable action was taken. The board also met in closed session with its lead labor negotiator for the negotiations involving the collective bargaining groups identified in the agenda, and no reportable action was taken. Thank you.
All right then. Anything else, board members? Anything to add? Voice? No? Then hey, we'll see you all soon. Hey, 4th of July is going to happen soon, so I hope you all have a safe 4th of July.
You too. Happy
Thank
4th
you.
of July. Be safe.
Good night, everyone.
Stay safe.
Bye, everybody.
Happy 4th.
Thank you.